Stop getting "because I said so" answers within education and your study time. We're going to define a "because I said so" answer here as an answer given with no explanation as to why the answer is what is given or an explanation of how that answer was derived. We have all given and received a "because I said so" type answer from time to time, and from time to time they are necessary in certain circumstances, especially when we don't have a lot of time to explain the reasons for a particular decision or how we derived or got an answer to get to a particular decision. However, within the field of education, the "because I said so" type of answer is particularly not useful because, of course, the whole purpose of the learning process is to answer the why questions, not just to have the answer to a particular question. For example, if someone told us the answer to an equation is 4, that wouldn't really help us from an educational perspective. We might be able to, in a practical sense, be able to take that number and apply it in a particular practical sense if we are part of some type of system. But when we're trying to learn the why it is 4, then the answer of it being 4 is not as important as the explanation of how we derive that answer to be 4. We may think that the "because I said so" type answer within education would come from the instructor, but that's not usually the case. Most of the instructors are very knowledgeable about the subject matter that they are in. If they have the time to explain the reasoning behind a particular answer, they're probably more likely to give an overextensive answer than we're looking for as to why a certain answer is what it is. But an instructor may give a "because I said so" type of answer when limited in things such as time, or from time to time, if an instructor doesn't know the answer, then we might get a "because I said so" type of answer rather than just admitting that we don't know. Sometimes those instructors might do that from time to time. But more often when we're working in education, we're going to get a type of "because I said so" type answer from the materials we're using, which is going to be the text or a database program. And that's because, of course, the instructor's time is limited. We don't have the interaction of the instructor all the time, especially if we have large class sizes or if we're in an online type of environment. Therefore, the instructor that we're really interacting with most is actually, of course, the material being in the format of written text in some way, or that written text being in a database program along with some format of question and answers, which usually take the form of multiple choice, short answer type of questions. All of these educational resources are great tools, but they all have their pros and they all have their cons. As we put together our resources to optimize our time, we need to recognize what those pros and cons are, and we also need to recognize that as we talk to different people, their incentives are going to be biased based on where they are at. In other words, if we talk to the publisher of the textbook, then of course they're going to say that the textbook is the best thing there is. If we talk to the publisher of the database program or an institution who is currently moving all their information from a standard text to a database program or from an in-class instruction to a database program, then of course they're going to be biased towards the benefits of the database program. And if we talk to a traditional type of instructor that's used to instructing, they're going to have some bias for traditional instruction. So our goal here is to think of, okay, what are the pros and cons from kind of a neutral standpoint, an unbiased standpoint as we look at these resources so that we can format our tools in the most optimal way. Note too that our perspective can be seen as bias as well because we have an interest, a financial interest, as we do provide some educational resources as well. So we'll try to give our opinion on this, but as you look at our opinion, just as you would the publisher's opinion or an instructor's opinion about the types of resources that we should have, or the book's opinion about the types of resources you have, you need to take those in with a grain of salt and make your own decisions about what the best resources to use are. Of these resources, the instructor is actually the most traditional type of instructional resource that we have, but many institutions are moving away from the instructor so that they can optimize more people, more students into a particular class size. So the limitations on the instructor, of course, is the instructor is only effective up to so many students in a class because beyond that, they can't have that same interaction. Therefore, most institutions are moving in some format to other things, such as, of course, textbooks, which would be more traditional, or some type of online database program. This leaves learners with limited access to one-on-one type of instruction, but other alternative resources they can rely on. We then have the textbook, and the textbook is a great resource. It's a 3D resource. It's something that we can thumb through, and many people like the physical component of a textbook to be able to highlight a textbook, to write notes within a textbook. It does, of course, have the limitations of it being on a page, so we have to fit everything on a particular page. And if we're talking about long types of problems that have connections and fit together, then we can only basically fit things together if we have, say, a table on 2 pages by either having a reference number that people have to go in and reference the 2 numbers, or to have some kind of arrows that are going all over the place for a long, extensive type of problem. And that could be a little daunting to look at the textbook. It's actually nice to be able to see those connections in another more interactive way. I would argue the best way to see those interactions is with a spreadsheet type program. Many schools, however, are taking this textbook and putting it into a database program and adding more resources within the database program. So whether we have a textbook or not, we may be supplementing our information with a database program or just putting that textbook in as an e-reader. Now, the textbook in a database program as an e-reader has some pros and cons. The con is, of course, many people like the 3D physical feel of a textbook. To go through the textbook does have benefits to it. But some of the pros of having the textbook in the database program is that you can search by keywords within the textbook, which is nice. You can write notes rather than being in the margin. You can kind of write notes and search by notes. You can search by highlighted text. You can delete the highlighted text. So there's a lot of advantages actually to having the book in the e-reader, but in essence, it's still the same type of resource, and you have similar limitations of it being basically a 2-dimensional surface. You can't see really the connections of just a textbook too easily, although you can include links with it. And so those are kind of some of the limitations. What then will be added oftentimes with accounting courses in particular is to use a database program to provide problems that can be practiced. And this can be a great tool for a particular type of problem, usually short answer type problems or multiple choice question type problems. In other words, if we want to just practice multiple choice questions over and over again, the database program can keep on generating multiple choice questions. It can even take out multiple choice questions, which we know well, and concentrate on the ones that we don't know well. It can have options for us to jump to the book and back within the multiple choice questions, and all those are great tools to have. The multiple choice questions in the database program has the same essential problem as they do in the textbook, and that is basically a because I said so type of answer. We're going to have a question that's a multiple choice, and the answer is going to be basically C. Now, they might be able to jump to the book and say, hey, this is around the area that you could find related topics that is the explanation for this response, or they might give a short description of the explanation for the response. But these resources rarely answer the questions that we have as we start to learn a new topic. And the reason for that is because the multiple choice questions in and of themselves, in the format of themselves, are zooming into one really small thing. And the question we really have is, how does this fit into the big picture? Why do I really need to know this? How does it go towards the end goal of the financial statement? The reason we have a lot of multiple choice questions is not because it's going to help us learn the topic the best. It's because those are the questions that fit best into a database program. So really, we're designing the kind of questions that we look at, not by the questions that are going to help people understand the topic the best, but by the convention of what we're using to display the questions, that being a database program, and therefore the short type of questions, multiple choice questions, short answer type questions are the ones that we see most of the time. These formats of questions lead us to feel like we got a because I told you so type of answer. In other words, if we have a question and they tell us then the answer is C, then we start to feel like we just got a because I told you so type of answer, and we start to modify our study time to memorizing answers rather than understanding the concepts. Memorizing answers and repeating them back, such as a parrot does, can help us increase scores on tests, but it really only puts that information into short-term memory and not something that we can actually apply and use. What we really want to do is have the information, the concepts, and learn the concepts. That's what puts the information into long-term memory, makes it actually useful and applicable to practice, as well as helps us to pass the test. What we really want to do then is look at those kind of problems that are going to be more big picture type of problems, so we can see the full concepts first, get the concept down, then practice with the database program on the short multiple choice questions to get how those kind of tricky multiple choice questions will be worded, taking the concept and then twisting them around so they fit in a very short format. We want to learn the concept first, then go into the multiple choice questions and just practice how they'll be kind of tricky, kind of twisting of the concepts in different ways. The best way to work larger problems, those best for learning the new concepts, is with computerized spreadsheet programs such as Excel, such as Google Sheets. We could do it by hand, but it would take a lot more time, and there's actually advantages to the spreadsheet program. Advantages over doing it by hand because of course it's faster, but also big advantages over the database program. So note that a lot of the database programs do have the ability to assign problems that are more comprehensive and do provide more of the big picture information. But they have the same drawbacks as accounting software does in that they're a database program, not a transparent spreadsheet. So every number that we look at in the database program doesn't give us how that number was derived. We can't look at it and say, where did that come from? It came from somewhere else in the database program, but we can't see it. It's not transparent. That's what they call on the back end, on the programming side of the database program. We can't see it. It's too complex. But on a spreadsheet, every number we put our mouse on, every number we highlight, we can see exactly where it came from very transparently. That's going to be the difference. Now note that within a database program, if an institution knows how to implement the database program well, they are getting better and better. However, many institutions don't really understand how to use the optionality of the database programs optimally, and therefore what happens is they shy away from the more complex or longer problems that can give us the concepts better because it's easier to assign the shorter problems and therefore not have to deal with the kind of the settings that are an issue in terms of giving the answer away or not giving the answer away as you assign a particular problem. So therefore the database programs, if they're used well by the institution, do have the ability to give those longer problems that can give a better idea of the big picture, but there are still limitations, and actually a spreadsheet program is still way better for learning the concepts because it's going to be much more transparent. So let's give an example of this. And remember, as we go through this example, most students probably won't see a comprehensive problem like this because, again, most institutions will shy away from it because of the complications of assigning it in terms of the settings. But if we were to see a more complex type of problem in something like a database program, we would have some connections. Let's compare and contrast them to the things we might see in a more transparent type of Excel sheet or Google Sheet. If we had a longer problem, we might have kind of a list of journal entries we'd have to have within a longer problem. So the problem, this would be in a database program, the problem might say, you know, these are the transactions, here's a list of transactions, and we want you to make the journal entries for them. And then we would go down here and we'd have a drop down for the date, a drop down for the accounts that we'd have to pick the account, in these accounts that kind of magically appear when we select this little arrow drop down, and then we'd put the amount here in the debit and the credit. Now some smaller problems, this will be it, right? This will be the answer, and then we would hit submit, and it would tell us if it's right or wrong, meaning it would turn red or green, whether it be right or wrong. If we left it at that point in time, we have kind of a because I told you so type of answer, and because there's no real explanation for it. And the reason there's no explanation is because if this is a type of problem where this is all we have, then we can't see where it's going. We don't know why anything's happening. These are floating journal entries. So if this is the answer, then we basically had to imagine everything out. All the questions that we're going to have as a student learning this is going to be, well, how does that tie into the GL, or what is the GL, or is this the GL, or this is the general journal? Where's the trial balance? What does that do to the financial statements? If this is the answer, we don't have answers to any of those questions, and most learners are, don't really understand how the puzzle pieces fit together to see how these floating journal entries would then fit into the bigger piece. Now, if we had a more comprehensive problem, it might have this tab, which is connected to another tab, which again really increases the complexity of the database program. But it could give us more value in a more comprehensive problem because that would answer some questions. We could say the database program might have some other kind of tab in it and say, well, here's how it relates to the general ledger. And this general ledger then on a separate tab, a separate page, so we can't see them on the separate page, but this general ledger kind of magically appears as we enter this information in, which is nice. But again, as a student, we probably go to the second tab and it just kind of magically appeared there. And unless we go into each one of these lines and go back, we're probably not going to get a good grasp of it. And also note that we can't really go to each line item as this. Like I can't know where the 0 came from, and then I see the 74,000 and I can say, well, okay, well, here's one there, there's one there. Either this one caused that one or that one caused this one. I know that. And I can kind of piece this together and put it together, and that's nice. But notice if this was in Excel or if this was in Google Sheet, every one of these cells, I can see where it came from. In the database program, this came from somewhere, but I don't know where it came from. It just magically appears. A magical database program gave me a because I told you so answer. But if it was in Excel, I can click on any of these numbers and know exactly where it came from with a very easy formula, which would say this plus this, right? And that would be very transparent. That's way more transparent. Now, in the database program, some of them are getting a lot better in trying to have a connection. So I believe this little icon will be a connection to try to go back and show you where the other item is. And that's great. That's better than a textbook because you see an actual physical connection that goes back. But it's still not anywhere near as good as Excel, where you don't have to go to this cell. You can go to any of these cells and know exactly where that cell came from, whereas this is going to jump to one little area. So the database program is writing more code to try to tell you what the code is to get to this number and this number. Whereas if it was a spreadsheet, you don't need any more code. You can see the simple code directly, which is just this number is this plus this. And you can see that very easily on any number that's there. Plus, you can put these two things on one page, which is nice. If you have to go from tab to tab, it's a little bit more difficult. If it's on one page, you can actually have an arrow point right to it in an Excel sheet by just using some of the functions in Excel. If you then have this GL account, then we still need like the end result, the trial balance. The relationship between this journal entries and the GL often confuses students more because of the length of the GL. It's just a daunting amount of information. So they don't really see how how this gets to the trial balance. So we could have another tab that says, okay, here's the trial balance, but we have similar kind of information. Now the trial balance could just magically appear on some other tab as we enter this data. And again, the students, the learners are going to look at this and just look at it passively. And unless they go back, which they could go back using our arrows again, they're probably just going to passively be overwhelmed by the amount of data that just kind of magically appeared by the magical database program. It's just kind of like this is the way it is because I told you so type of answer. Now, if we had this in Excel, then of course we can go into each one of these cells and know exactly where they are, where it came from, and we can piece it together a little bit more directly, and we can put it all on basically one page to do that. And you can also imagine the grading problems. Like if you had this in a database program and you were an institution, just think about, well, how would we give this out to people, and what if they didn't know how to do this? How would they move on to the next step? And that's why many times these problems aren't assigned, even though you really want to work something longer like this because it's going to help you actually understand the concept. So you can understand where the institution's coming from by not assigning these type of problems, but they're ones that you can pick up the concepts with most clearly. And then this of course would be used to make the financials. And the same thing is happening here. You could see in a database program they might have references all over. The same with a book. A book might just have references all over. That's the traditional method to tick and tie everything out with these references. But if you use Excel, which is like what's probably going to be used a lot in practice, you don't need the references as much because you can see directly where this number came from because it's just in a simple formula that's very transparent on the Excel sheet. So when you work these longer problems, even if you use a great database program and a great database program assignment was assigned to you, which requires a good database program and a well-knowledgeable institution that has the ability to assign these programs with confidence because they understand how to use the database program. Even if that's the case, then you could still, an Excel worksheet is still better. It's still more transparent if you can find those resources to supplement your information. Note that the same thing is the problem with QuickBooks or accounting software as well. The whole point of the accounting software is to have a magical database that gives you a because I told you so answer. In other words, all these forms that we make, an invoice, a create sales receipt, a receive payment, and if we enter the deposits, all of that is a form which doesn't even have a journal entry in it. It's just a magical database, and then QuickBooks makes the financial statement. So for learners that actually learn accounting through data input, through accounting software, the reason they're going to school is to learn what is going on within the magical database. They want to know how do these financial statements get made by putting this information into the system. And notice oftentimes what they get is another magical database that's basically given because I told you so type of answers. And what you really need is something that's really transparent that tells you what this invoice is doing and how it's connected then ultimately to the financial statements. The most transparent way to do that, spreadsheets, Excel, Google Sheets. And of course, we do have problems that do include spreadsheets of longer problems that you could download and work through along with step-by-step instructional videos to get an idea of those longer problems at accountinginstruction.info.